Welcome to Claiming Space, a podcast about what it really means to step forward, speak up, and lead with intention. This first season is all about women in leadership, the real stories behind the roles, the challenges, the ambition, and the moments that shape how we lead. Each episode is hosted by a Maynard Lee facilitator, sharing honest conversations about leadership as it actually shows up at work. This isn't about perfect answers. It's about insight, reflection, and the courage to own your voice. So whether you're leading others, stepping into something new, or thinking about the space you want to take up, you're in the right place. Welcome to episode 2 of Claiming Space. The theme today centers around male allyship in action, on what real support looks like. We'll be exploring lived experiences, particularly the dynamics around authority, visibility, and perception. It's not about speaking for women. It's about what it means to lead with awareness and use influence well. Today's guest is the Chief Executive Officer at Waythrough, Paul Townsley. Paul is leading Waythrough into a new chapter and knows of Maynard Lee from his time at Humankind, bringing deep experience of values-led leadership and organisational change. So, Paul, it's lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here.
How's your journey been in today?
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, I came down yesterday and the sun's out today.
Oh.
It feels like spring's arrived.
It's lovely today. It almost feels like my seasonal depression is just lifting away from me.
Yeah.
So, Paul, I'd love to hear a little bit about the organisation that you work for.
Yeah, so I've been chief exec for about 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, we've grown from being a northern-based charity to a national charity delivering mental health, substance use, support and treatment, housing, domestic violence services, and a whole range of different types of services across the country. So it's been a real sort of journey and really exciting process of developing the charity and the people we work with. So my role is I report to a board of trustees and a chair, and we've recently merged with Richmond Fellowship and Humankind. So a lot of my work over the last couple of years has been bringing people together and developing the new organisation. I guess it feels like a great responsibility to make sure the services keep improving. But we also feel like now we can be a bit more ambitious about what we want to do. But what we're trying to do is do something about that to try and have a positive effect on people's lives.
How did you get into this area of work?
When I kind of left school, I went to Bradford Nuclear College. It was the only place I could get on a degree. And it was a fantastic degree, and it was quite interesting because I was the only man on my course. Each year, you had to find somewhere to get some work experience. So my brother knew somebody who worked in a community drug and alcohol service in Grimsby, Birmingham. So that's where I went to work and do some experience, and then I did voluntary work. So that was in 1989, so it's a long time ago now. And I never believed I'd be doing that work. That would become my career, but that has essentially become my career working in this area.
So it sort of spanned your entire career?
Pretty much, yeah, from 25 onwards, yeah. Before that, I did different things. But yeah, from that time onwards, I went and did social work and things like that. But I've always worked for charities, up and through the organisations into management. So it's all changed. But yeah, it was looking back on it, it was quite a transformative effect on my life doing that course and getting this experience.
Looking back at some of that early time, what experiences has actually shaped the leader that you are today?
Yeah, I guess part of it is working with people in doing work around drug and alcohol and people with mental health issues and social issues, but working in something which is kind of a real purpose. I was really, it felt quite motivating to be doing that and challenging. And then seeing leaders that were actually quite committed to do something about the inequalities and stigma that people faced. There was a lot of lived experience amongst people, and people were quite courageous, I guess, in some of the things they were doing. And often a lot of the people we work with are seen as being undeserving of care, and there's a high level of stigma. So leadership in that sense was people who were basically saying, we are going to challenge the kind of status quo. And then I guess also because I kind of felt like I didn't necessarily fit in a conventional sense into the world of management.
And what's kept you engaged in this idea of leadership development?
Well, I think partly because there's still so much to learn all the time and develop and improve. So I see it sort of makes me feel alive working with others on leadership development. But I just think there's so much for us to do that can be better in terms of the way we lead and manage and run organisations. And I guess it is this theory that the way we run things and do things isn't very good, and that there's actually a different way of doing things that's better, that's more human and leads to better things for people, better outcomes for people and communities. And so I guess part of my connection is wanting to improve personally, but also seeing the benefit of the different ways of working can be. And I suppose that's when why I worked with Maynard Lee is there's that sort of sense of things being better and improving the way workplaces work, because it's such an important part of our lives.
Because you've been an ambassador of Maynard Lee for a long
I've
time
been
now.
ambassador of Maynard Lee, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, just going back a little bit to your time in college,
Yeah.
where you mentioned that the course you were in was sort of predominantly female-based.
Yeah.
Thinking about women in leadership in the industry that you work in now, would you say a space where there is a lot of women in leadership?
Yeah, I guess generally speaking, ours is a female. Women are in the majority in the organisations we're in. And I suppose there's two bits to say really, is that firstly, I'm coming into it with an interest in this area, but I'm by no means an expert. And I didn't know that I was going to be the only man on the course, by the way. So that was a surprise to me. But it's critically important for us. And I guess for me, it's so important because about 70% of our staff are women, and therefore that's really important that there are women leaders in our organisation. I guess ultimately, should there be a woman CEO of an organisation like ours? So I guess what you tend to find is that there is a really healthy representation of women in our sector, but that it's probably still the balance that there are disproportionately more men as you get higher up in the organisation.
So there's still a need for sort of female role models in the leadership space.
Yeah. And I guess there will be a perception of potentially a glass ceiling, I guess, for women sometimes around where they can get to and how that workplace adapts so that the qualities they bring are truly valued. Yeah.
And thinking about how things are now, have you noticed any sort of difference compared to earlier in your career?
One of the things we did quite a bit on the responsibility in business practice course I was doing is the need for more feminine values as opposed to masculine values. And I guess the idea behind that is that, whether you're a man or a woman, you can work with different values. But I guess those values that are more such as cooperation, kindness, intuition, things that are more perceived as feminine values are increasingly more valued in the workplace than when I first started. But I guess what we had as we were starting is more potential equality in the workplace than you would have had in some of the other organisations when I first, some other businesses. So retail, for example, which I worked in quite a lot. And I guess what you do find as well is you would have had acceptable practices going on in workplaces which were discriminatory against women that are a lot less accepted now and challenged. So I think there has been improvements in terms of equality for women, some of the changes we've made, but there's still a lot of things that aren't working. So we still have a gender pay gap,
Yeah,
but it's very small
I see.
um, compared. So we do better compared to the sectors we're in. But
I guess that really highlights stark differences between men and women and how that's
yeah,
still prevalent today in the workplace.
yeah. I guess some of the sort of experiences I've had that were sort of really shocking to me is when I first started working, I did a placement for a union, which where most of the members were women. It was a public sector one, but
Okay.
all the paid roles were pretty much done by men. That was a kind of a union that you would think would be campaigning for the rights of the people that they're
Mhm.
representing,
Mhm.
but they weren't. So small charities were very, very different in that context.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And was there a point that you noticed that leadership systems don't operate in the same way for everyone?
Well, yeah, almost immediately, really, I suppose. Uh, you know, and I guess they didn't operate equally for me,
Mm.
and I suppose that's the interesting thing. But I didn't necessarily fit into people's mindset of what a typical leader would be.
Mm.
So I guess within that, when I moved to be a leader in London, there was very much an old boys network in the leadership across
Mhm.
the city. I found that I couldn't get into that for
So even
obviously,
more exclusivity there.
but even more in terms of if you're a woman. My boss at the time, the chair of the board, described how she was treated in the meetings with those people, and
Mhm.
you know how it made her cry sometimes in the meetings that the way they were with her,
Oh,
and so that was sort of showed that although I felt that those typical things like imposter syndrome and not being good enough to be in there, and that's how you were kind of made to feel. For
yes.
a
Yeah.
woman, it was much harder. And she
Mm.
described how you know, she found that she just had to develop a different way of being to be in that space, and she had to make that choice. Yeah.
So, were there any dynamics that you observed that might not be obvious to everyone?
Um, when worked in another organisation, it was pretty much an all male senior team that
Mm-hmm.
I was sat on, but the people who did all the work were women. The people who did everything, you know, the middle people were all women.
They were women. Yeah.
Um, and the culture in that charity was very much around people giving up their kind of lives for the work. You know,
Mm.
that's one of the challenges of people working strongly with vocation is that in a charity is that you're not doing it for the money, therefore you're just doing it all the time. And so what I noticed was that for a lot of the people, this was having quite a detrimental effect on their well-being.
Mm.
But what I was witnessing was people with young families. We were talking about your young family
Yes.
who
Yes.
basically weren't spending time with their families
Mm-mm.
and their partners, you know, and it's like
So, having to dedicate such a large chunk of their life.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that being part of the job and expectation, not a bonus if somebody did that, or
So,
you know, not
lots
a
of.
choice. It was kind of implicit in what he did. Um,
Have you noticed a change in recent times?
um, I think,
So this idea of the work-life balance and prioritizing work over family, have you
yeah,
noticed any change in that?
yeah. I think definitely. I think we still work. So we're working through it, but I mean, we encourage people to have work-life balance. And I suppose some of my things are, and I'm not being critical of any previous organisations I've
Mm-hmm.
worked for and things, but I suppose one of my things in leadership is to take my opportunity being the CEO not to do some of the things other organisations did with different CEOs and different boards.
Hmm.
Um, but I think there is definitely now recognition that if you want people to do really good work for you, then there's got to be sort of a balance to that for them, and an appreciation that if somebody wants to work more flexible working hours or in a different way,
Yeah.
what they deliver is often better than somebody who's, you know, working really hard.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I think obviously COVID and the pandemic changed things a lot, but I think increasingly those bad habits creep back in. And I think we have that sort of opportunity to strip out a lot of what's not that important at work, but we still insist on a lot of it, which makes people struggle with their work-life balance, I think. Yeah.
And thinking about when women do step into visible leadership roles,
Yeah.
what tends to change in how they're perceived?
Yeah, I was listening to the podcast last week, and I think it's genuine that where they were talking about if a woman behaves in a certain way, it's seen as negative, and if a man
Yes,
behaves in the
yes.
same way, it's positive.
Mm.
That's certainly there for
So you're still seeing
you
that's the
still
case.
see that, yeah, and people find that a challenge, I think. But I
Mm.
do think that that it's changing in terms of people that being acceptable now. I think there is certainly greater understanding. What we're doing in Waythrough is having different groups. So we've got a work stream starting around menopause and the way menopause affects women at work. And I've certainly been involved in that appreciation in my work. I've worked with people on how that's affected them, and that's worked really well. But I suppose you still get different attitudes across men and women about all those different things. So sometimes it's not always the man in the room that's perceiving things negatively. It can be women in the room as well. I guess it's working on that sort of competence or values-based behaviours that you want to see in people. The sort of women leaders I work with bring so much added value in terms of how they see the work that we're doing with the people we're working with. And I think that's seen by people as well.
So I really want to touch base on how confidence is sometimes misread or
Yeah.
labelled incorrectly, and your thoughts around that.
I suppose when you're working with new people or people who've just started working for the organisation, there's a piece of work around cultural fit often. Sometimes in that process, the way people behave and if it's a woman as well, they can be perceived as not being a cultural fit, but it's potentially for the employer and the organisation to think about how they move towards the person as opposed to expecting the person to change the way they behave in some way. And I think what you do notice sometimes is that cultural fit perception can be where somebody may be a bit blunt or
Yeah.
challenging, and people find that from a woman quite hard to take, potentially. Can be the same with a man. I know to be the case is that for men, you don't have to potentially worry about that stuff. You know, you don't have to make people feel at ease to say something challenging sometimes. Whereas I think it becomes much more tiring and challenging for women. Yeah, so I think they're the things I've kind of observed.
And in your experience as a leader,
Yeah,
if you see a woman's authority being undermined in a room,
yeah.
what does this idea of intervening look like?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think it feels like for this one, for me, I need to put more thought into it. But I have got examples. I think I have directly fed back to people
Yeah.
in different roles where I felt that people were not being treated fairly, and I think that's okay because I think that's something you have to do.
Yes. Yeah.
But I remember a recent situation where there was 2 men and 2 women on a panel to do a big pitch in a area we wanted to work in to win a contract, and we thought we had a really good chance of winning this. We were pretty confident,
Yeah.
possibly too overconfident because we didn't win it. But the people were so rude to us in that room. And I didn't intervene because we were pitching for that business.
Okay.
But the lead person was really rude, and the 2 women were really upset by it. So the men just kept going. Me and the other person just kept talking, but the 2 women just retreated. They just went,
Oh,
I
wow.
can't really speak in this space. because this guy was so rude.
In hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently?
That's the bit I have to think on, because I think I should be thinking, what do I need to be doing in those spaces more?
Yeah.
What was happening in there was, I think there's something around in the space. Is this really as bad as I think it is? Which you kind of know, yes, it is. But secondly, and this goes on still, I think, it is okay to treat people like that. So this is a public sector where it's okay. And what was happening in there as well is there was some men, but it was mostly other women on the panel who were interviewing us, and he told them to basically shut up. You can't speak, you know.
How awful.
And then he just basically said, "You've not answered my question at all." And one of the interpretations was that he was being so rude, this was a bit of a test. And, if we accepted him being rude to us and we didn't get dislodged, that might be positive. But in hindsight, I wish I'd told him to get stuffed. Because I kind of knew we weren't going to win. I knew that he wasn't going to treat us so badly and that we were going to win the service, number one. And number two, why would we want to work with somebody who thinks it's okay to behave like that?
Value.
That is not going to improve with time.
No.
Yeah, I wish I'd acted in the space.
Well, let's move on to speak a little bit about allyship in practice.
Yes.
And thinking about in meetings or some of the decision spaces that you've been involved in, what behaviours genuinely create space?
Yeah, things that often create space is changing the way a space operates. There's something around co-creating the space and allowing other people to create different ideas. So that's something that spend a lot of time doing. And then I think it's about, allowing other people to take ownership of the space as well. So it's not just sort of doing it as a partnership. It's saying you might be better able to decide what we're doing in that space. So I suppose they're the things I've done more latterly in recent years, is hand over the ownership to other people. Some of the small steps you'd make is doing something quite informal at the start of the meeting to try and relax people into the meeting.
So something to almost humanise.
To humanise the space.
Yeah.
I think some of the other small acts are to change, like I said, to change some of the dynamics of meetings and what you're doing. But I think that is an area for me to think about, actually, the small acts. So I have got things probably I'm doing, but it's probably more of a note to think about what actually happened.
So are there any moments where, looking back, you would have done things differently, thinking about allyship in particular for women?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a lot further I would have gone to be more challenging about culture and behaviours historically, that I think now there wouldn't have been any issue doing it. But somehow I think you get sort of intimidated, or I don't know, there's a challenge sometimes to think, well, am I the only one who sees it like this? So that situation I was talking to you about the way middle managers were treated, I was the only person who sort of spoke up about it. So you think, am I on my own? But I think looking back in that allyship, there is something about challenging unacceptable behaviour more, and creating that culture and speaking out more broadly, not just around what you might see as anti-discriminatory behaviour, but also how you create a better environment for women in the workplace. And I guess trying to understand and listen more as well, perhaps historically, I guess. Sometimes, I mean, it's not to say that I don't do that and I haven't done that. I remember challenging quite a senior person about the way they spoke about women. So it's not that I don't do it, but I think I could have done more of it. Yeah. So I think often in our world, like, feels like, and we're sort of crisis managing often in charities. So sometimes things like how people are feeling feel like a kind of a luxury.
So that kind of sits on the shelf for a little
bit. Yeah. And I suppose that's it. When I first started working, particularly around culture and race, that was a massive issue in services. And then as funding got cut, it's something that's not talked about very much. So a lot of our services are not very reflective of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is something about paying more attention to that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Let's explore some advice that you would give to other leaders. So for those who do want to support women in leadership, but are not sure how to, where may they start?
Yeah, and I think again, this one is coming to it more. It's more a memo to sell than I'm brilliant. We need to do this. But I think, I mean, part of it is really assessing how representative, the things like gender pay gap, the sort of hard data really. And we've talked around intuition, but how is it for getting feedback from people?
Mm-hmm.
Really looking at and trying to be honest about how things are for women in your workplace. But then I guess it's making sure you promote and champion people and get a reflective workforce. So I think I've always wanted to make sure I get the right sort of people in leadership positions with the right skill set to take the organisation forwards, and taking that opportunity for women to be a big part in that as well. And that's obviously really important where we are. I guess where you'd start really as well is listening to, trying to work out sustainable working practices for people in the workplace, not just women, but for everybody, and making sure that is a safe place for people to work in. They're the sort of steps you take. I guess the more memo to self developmental things are then about doing much more considered work around supporting people with their careers and developments, and younger people, so they can be the kind of leaders of the kind of future, I guess.
Yeah.
Because that's all available to us.
So really nurturing the next generation into the workplace.
Yeah.
Okay, and inspiring. And
Yeah.
So again, for those who do want to support women in leadership, are there any behaviours that they could examine within themselves? Yes, model. Could be another way to look at it. What kind of behaviours would they model?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly one of the things we talked about is expectations and the way you are. And I suppose one of the things we've been looking at 360 feedback and getting feedback from colleagues. And I suppose one of the things hopefully I've got is that I don't personally expect people to work in the same way I do, but I also have a good work-life balance and spend a lot of time trying to be healthy at work and outside of work. So I take it seriously. I think I score quite highly on work-life balance, and so I think I've always not wanted to be in an organisation where people become unwell because of their jobs. And I guess when you then look at that, it's really hard for women who've got generally a lot more to do outside of the workplace to function and do really well in that space. So I think that's something that is really important, I think.
So that idea of well-being.
Yeah, and role modelling that. Yeah. And that's where continuous leadership development is important. The way you are and what people then pick up from that has been acceptable. And I guess we all appreciate that there are good things to what we're doing and bad things. There's sort of what you might call the shadow side.
Yeah.
And trying to tune into that and how you either minimise that or you don't let that adversely affect other people, I guess.
And have you come across any common pitfalls for well-intentioned allies?
I suppose people have kind of blind spots. So I can kind of think that people think they're doing well, but they're not really that open to feedback. Yeah. And I guess we've all got blind spots, but it's people, particularly in more senior roles, are uninterested in feedback a lot. In my experience, not the and when I think about it, I've had male bosses, and most of my career have been managed by women, and it tends to be different.
So what are you noticing there in terms of the differences?
Well, there's a difference in terms of interest in feedback. The men were less interested in feedback than the women and acting on it.
Why do you think that might be?
I think part of it is because they're insecure. They probably knew what some of the feedback was, but didn't want to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is about that their development and the culture of them needing to be kind of untouchable and perfect as a boss. So I think it was about that. That's not wanting to show any vulnerability. Whereas I think often with the women leaders I've had and managers, they're much more open to feedback. So yeah, I guess that's important.
Of course, of course.
I think we all tend to prefer certain types of people,
Yeah.
but quite often people don't see that and think that they're doing really well in terms of allyship, but they're only doing it with certain types of people. Yeah.
Really interesting insight into the differences.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a sort of an archetypal boss where they don't want to hear any bad news. Yeah.
So the shield.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thinking about what gives you hope when you look to the next generation of women leaders?
There are so many. I have two daughters, so one's at university, one's going to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are much more passionate about changing the way in which we work and the way life is, what the potential can be, have a fresh approach, and aren't kind of inhibited by all the types of systems we've all worked in, or I've worked in all my working life. So I think it gives me a lot of hope that people want to get involved in it and change the ways in which we work. So that
and continue conversations as well.
Yeah, continue the conversations. But there is a lot of passion for a lot of the things we're doing and want to change.
And I guess nothing changes unless we have men and women working together as well at the same time.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's that sort of new energy and people not being shackled by what's happened before and can look at something we're doing and go, why is it like that? It doesn't have to be like that. Yeah.
You're right. So if organisations were to make one meaningful shift now, what would you reckon that would be?
I think there's something around, I guess it's been done before, I assume, and stuff, but I guess it's about being more conscious around the sort of proportion of leaders to reflect the type of workforce and communities you're working with. So I think if there was one change, it's about having more of a conversation about being more reflective and actually making that happen. I know that that's more challenging because we can't say, for example, the next CEO is going to be a woman, but you can look at how you get more opportunities for not just women, but different types of people to progress in your organisation, I think. So one step would be to do that more consciously, more definitively. Yeah.
And my last question. So if an emerging woman leader is listening today and quietly questioning herself, what would you want her to hear from you?
I guess the key bit is that you can do it and you should do it. It's really important to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been lovely having you on our episode of Claiming Space and hearing all about your insights and your journey and your words of wisdom.
Right, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure being here. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much to our host and guest for today's conversation, and thank you for listening to Claiming Space. We hope it's given you something to think about or something to take away with you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. You can also connect with us and continue the conversation on our social channels. Just search for us and follow along. Until next time, keep claiming your space.